Calvi with us this evening. So thank you people on Zoom. Thank you people who ventured out into this cold, dark, dreary night. I've known John for some time, and he's many things. He's a massage therapist, he's a teacher, he's a writer. What I find really powerful, I think I first encountered John through his written word, and he has a way of being sort of raw in his honesty about experience and deep in his insights. And so I was really drawn to that. And I've also had a few opportunities for John to sort of casually use his gift with me. And the healing experiences that I have had have usually come from a few words or a sentence or a question that he has asked me. And they've been remarkable experiences. So he's a bit of a mystery. Quakers like mysteries, so that's a good thing. Two of John's books are available in the back, and those are going to be about $10 each, I believe. And you can talk to Marshall, John's husband, is in the back, and he'll be selling those books. If you haven't been in this building before, you should know the restrooms are just outside. If you didn't eat dinner before you came, there are a few snacks and some water in the back. And that, I think, is all we need to know. Are we good?
Out of the silence.
Out of the silence. All right, thank you. John Calvi.
Can we begin with a bit of quiet? Yes? Dear, great and Holy Spirit, be with me now as I do this work, that we may each have protection and comfort and healing. I am so grateful to see all of you here. Thank you very much for being here. I have been off the road for a while. I had some serious illness, and this is sort of an experiment to see if I can still do some teaching, if I can sit up straight and make sense. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity that you're here, and grateful to Reedwood Friends for the invitation, and especially to Sean Connolly for making this opportunity happen. I've written an outline of what I was going to say tonight, but I don't like it so much. So we'll see. I want to start out mentioning that we're in a difficult time with the politics of our nation. Today is National Transgender Remembrance Day. We have lost a lot of people to violence. And with this election, I think we're going to see a great deal of suffering. Suffering that Quakers will, as is their tradition, come and work with. Quakers are famous for being some of the first people to carry water to the fire. And that's one of the things I like about us, that we are very service-oriented. there's a particular kind of hurt that's going on when you have a man who has been known to hurt people, escape justice. A lot of people, many people who have been hurt early in their lives, experience extra pain when they witness this happening again for someone else. If you've had early hurt and there has not been an apology, if there has not been redemption, then to witness this in the President of the United States causes a special hurt for folks all over again. I want to suggest that if this is a difficult issue for you, I think it might be a good idea if you find some quiet evening and you sit down in front of a large mirror. Mirror work is very old. It's in many mythologies, including Native Americans. Hiawatha was a cannibal until the Native American prophet Daganoweda showed him by looking in the water that he could be different. If you sit down in front of a large mirror by candlelight, turn off everything else, and just gaze into your own eyes for a long time, you will begin to see that young person who is hurt. And that person will have messages for you. And you will have messages for that person. And it could be that you come to a place where the hurt is not as loud as it used to be. And that would be a very good thing. That would be a real blessing. It takes some time and some patience and some courage, but it's a simple work that you can try and see if that works for you. I began my healing work back in 1982. I didn't know I was getting on that bus. I didn't really actually want to. When I was in massage school, I was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful to do massage on a cruise ship and spread oil over rich white people? But then people who had suffered sexual assault began to come to me for work, and then I began to work in the AIDS epidemic. And I began to focus primarily on trauma. And, it wasn't an easy thing. When folks came to me for work, things were sort of set up quickly. But then there were times when I had an opportunity to go and work somewhere where they didn't know me, and it wasn't a style of work they understood. I was doing some work in Toronto with the wonderful Quakers there, and I went to the Canadian Center for the Prevention and Treatment of Torture. They had a young woman there who was in psychosis because she had been made to witness the destruction of her family. And I knocked on the door and went in and talked to the two doctors and explained to them that I was a massage therapist specializing in trauma. And wouldn't they let me do some work with this young woman? No, they said, we won't. So then I explained that I was also a Quaker healer, which is when they began pushing me towards the door. And just then there was a phone call. A wonderful old Quaker lady, Nancy Pocock, wonderful Canadian Quaker friend. And she said, no, you should let him do this. And I was able to move my hands around her while she stood, and move all of the too much that was around her head. And slowly, slowly she began stop talking gibberish and stop moving in such an awkward way and so quickly. And sat down on the couch and went to sleep. And when she woke up, she was absolutely clear. And Dr. Block turned to me and he said, "Oh, you're a healer." And he came for a session the next day for himself. He was exhausted by the work, of course. Maybe I should look at those ideas that I thought I would use. Let me read you. The largest group of wounded people in the world are women with sexual abuse. It's larger than refugees or the homeless or the hungry or any other group. And in the United States, we live here in a rape culture where the protections are slight and the amount of hurt is really tremendous. It was my first work that I was doing, and always with strangers. But this was the first time I got to work with a friend. It's called Early Morning Light. I haven't put this story to paper before. I understand it differently now, maybe in ways I couldn't have decades ago. It was early morning when the phone rang. A woman I'd taught with in prisons was calling. She'd just come back from the hospital with a young friend who'd been raped. Earlier that morning, could I come do some healing work at the survivor's house now? I shower and dress and leave in a haste of bodily motion, but in my mind I am quiet and prayerful. Be thou with me now as I do this work, may I be a vessel of light. It's a long drive, giving me time to go over what I've heard, and then set the details aside to reach my deepest calm, and feel the heat grow in my hands as I tell myself, no worries, no fear. Don't interrupt the given flow of light with mere human obstructions. Ride the high tide to deliver the best. She had been out late at a party, walking back to her car in a dangerous part of town. This small young woman was literally picked up and carried to an abandoned building by a much larger man. She struggled and was beaten. When he was done, he walked off, leaving her in the dark. From the police station, she called her friend. They met at the hospital, and now they were both at the survivor's home. I come in slowly and quietly. I need to see and feel her response to this assault. Is she so tired and weary that she is calm, or is she fretful? Is she still or pacing? Are the words still too much to process? Or can simple, slow conversation happen without too much pressure? She is in pajamas in the living room, showered and exhausted. She's been given a sedative but hasn't slept. We don't discuss particulars. She feels best close to her friend and not talking very much. She lies on the carpet and we begin. I keep my hands soft and touch firm. I touch only her head and limbs, and do not approach the areas of trespass. I've done this work more times than I can count. Sexually abused women make up the largest group on the planet. But before this time, my work always came years after the assault, not fresh like this. There are no words to describe how it feels to open yourself up, to feel another's pain, and to come into your body. There can be no flinching or wincing or partial acceptance. It is beyond story or listening to, or wailing, or witnessing desperation. It is beyond empathy. It is a wave of knives forcing their way through, and any resistance catches like fish hooks. The task is to come in calm and strong and stand and face the wave and feel all of its meaning and dimension. And then let it go through. The bull under the red cape, the car sliding sideways on ice, the grief of trespass, brutality, and disrespect, all without filter. I touch her head and shoulders, I hold her feet, I hold her hands and draw down her arms. Each of these touches is a hello, and can we connect essential energies? Mostly it feels like an empty garage, only a shell, but by and by comes that energetic response in her, yes, I'm here, and soon a flood of her essence pushes to the surface. I draw this out as one would unfold a large tablecloth underwater to find the stains that need soap and scrubbing. More and more comes to the surface. Show me all there is. She is still lying quietly with little expression, no sound. I am working up a sweat doing the simplest touches. All the heavy lifting is felt and not seen until towards the end of the work. I am sweeping my hands over her as though I am gathering up all the light around her body. I am scooping up her most immediate and intense self to raise it upward, heavenward for cleansing. This is when tons of grief lifts from her body, passing through mine, and is released. My face crumples with terrifying sadness as my arms stay aloft. Her rage and deep sadness wash through me and are gone in moments. The friend sees this and identifies it accurately later. The survivor goes off to bed to sleep peacefully. I have a long drive home in which to be in awe of these moments. The work of being faithful and doing more somewhere soon. I'll see her for the first time a decade later. She will thank me again. I become teary to hear her gratitude and remember that early morning light. It's now more than 20 years later. Actually, about 40 years later. As I write this, looking back, I can see this miracle, not of my making, is that I wanted for the first battered woman I knew, my mother. Living with unrelenting violence and no one to provide protection created a longing in me. How this longing became connected to warm hands that lift wounds out of the body is beyond my understanding. It's a terrible gift. Terrible and beautiful. Terrible because there are no gloves, save focusing on the light. It cannot be done except in the war zone of that person's trespass. It's beautiful because relief is witnessed over and over in the most splendid geometry of balance and rightness. The process and understanding has changed for me over the years, but the basics remain the same. Gathering enough reverence beforehand is crucial. Rest and quiet afterwards are important too. I've made a small good life that allows me to dip into the gruesomeness. The older I get, the more beauty I need, I find, to balance it. She is very instrumental in helping me to connect with the Psychiatric Survivors Network. People who have been abused by psychiatry and mental health hospitals, and helping me to understand that sometimes the people that we see on the street are actually having spiritual experiences that we don't yet understand or have words for. And so maybe we should be more patient rather than fearful of the things that we're witnessing. For people who are maybe not yet diagnosed, maybe not yet have found a treatment that works for them. To balance this kind of work has taken me a long time. I find that if I can find things in my life to laugh about, then I can go and do scary work. And this was an opportunity of finding something ridiculously funny. This is called, Is That the Toilet Ringing? When Marshall and I moved back to Vermont, where we met, we found a little house to live in, and we moved in straight away. I had gotten angelic messages that I was going to be there for a long time. And it's been almost 40 years now. But when we moved in, I neglected to inquire whether or not there was a flush toilet, as one forgets to do. And halfway through moving in our things, I inquired as to where this might be. Oh, said the neighbor, it's solar. Go out the front door and cross the entryway, and there it was. I've gotten used to it now, except in February. It's very cold. You'd be surprised how quick business can be gotten done. Is that the toilet ringing? Well, I just want to say that if I did happen to drop my cell phone down my compost toilet this morning, it was very wise of me to hire the young farmer next door to rebuild the big hatch door that I use to empty the thing out every 6 or 8 years, because he put in a big hinge in the oversized lid and it pops open easier than a Budweiser. And this is very good because when I tried to go through the toilet seat, the ratio of shoulder proportions to toilet opening registers quickly. Even after you've used the landline to call yourself, and you can hear the little bugger ringing somewhere nearby, but just as a tad muffled by goodness knows what. And you reach in thinking it's just got to be near the top, and of course, just below the sawdust is something else that I recently put there, to my great relief, but now, of course, it's in the way. And I start to get nauseous, and really, why wouldn't I? But I'm sure if I could just reach a bit more, then I hang up on myself because I'm not answering. And so I call again, but first hands have to be scrubbed and go back and into the house and back out again, which is when I rip off the top of the toilet and the big 18-inch square opening looms like a cave nobody wants to go in. And it's still too far to reach quite So of course I have to go outside and see about the opening of the hatch that sits just downhill from the house like a basement door, but different because there's no dry storage here, no siree. But the good news is that the hatch isn't glued down and lifts open easily, and all I have to do is climb onto the small mountain of what country people like myself demurely call night soil, which is quite different from what you are imagining, which is some tank sloshing with stink and awfulness. But it's really a big heap of dry sawdust with tufts of toilet paper sticking out like lights on a Christmas tree, but less bright. And I reach in with the rake to take off the top of the mountain, but a shiny bit caught my eye off to the side. Sitting neatly on a lump of sawdust was my beloved iPhone that had fallen out of my bathrobe pocket as I scooped some sawdust to cover my morning donation, not realizing I'd made a surprising technological deposit at the same time, which then tobogganed down the slope to a nice dry resting place, awaiting me patiently like a Zen lesson to say, no, it's not the worst, but the day is young. Because the work is so intense and because there isn't a school for it, I found myself just making so many mistakes so early. I remember a time I'd been up too late the night before at a party, and I've gone into the hospital to do some massage on a fellow who's dying with AIDS. He can no longer speak. And I was hungover, but I dutifully showed up thinking what a wonderful person I was to go and do this. And I walk in and say hello, and I put my hands on him. And he's looking at me, and he's looking at where my hands are, and looking back at me and looking where my hands are. And I realized that the blankets and the bed clothing have gotten all kind of mussed up. And what I've actually done is given a 20-minute healing to the urinary tract from his catheter. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm so glad he can't speak. Another time I went into to do work in a prison. I have a history of early childhood abuse, including incest and rape. And in the middle of doing the psychotherapy on this issue, I get a call from a hospital chaplain to go and teach massage to a maximum security prison with a dozen murdering rapists, fellas who are in for life. And I thought, oh, thank you, Holy Spirit, for this wonderful opportunity at this time in my life. And I would go in, and two of the fellas, out of the 12, two of the fellas are serial murdering rapists. It's just something they've done a lot of, and they finally got caught. The other 10 are people who got caught with bad drugs and too much anger, and they exploded. That could happen to any of us. And so I began to teach them massage. And one fellow was doing the massage a little bit awkwardly than I had suggested. He was working up the arm rather than down the arm, sort of pushing the arm into the shoulder, which wouldn't feel very good. So I'm walking over to him to change his direction. And he looks up at me and he says, my wife did massage. My wife did wonderful massage. I must have been the one who killed her because I was the only other one in the room. We were doing lots of drugs. The prison psychologist says, I may never remember. And I looked at him and I said, And inside I was thinking, how did I get in here? Whose work is this? Get me out of here. But we had a nice day of doing that work together. And I began to understand rape in a way that I had not before. I began to understand rapists in a way that I had not before. And to have mercy for them, to have care for them. Sometimes when we're looking at a kind of trouble, we just see a big box that we don't understand how it's created or how it moves and why it's there. And if you can sit down next to the trouble without being frightened by it or without trying to kill it, then there's the possibility of learning how such a thing is constructed and why it's there. And by, we might come to understand that trouble is for learning. What do I know about this? If I know something about this, I might be able to go in and be of some help. If I don't know anything about it, then that could be a problem. Maybe I could find someone who knows something about it. But until that happens, I really can't offer very much. We save ourselves a lot of trouble by saying, I don't know anything about this. Even though it's a terrible thing, we want to help. We can be careful as we go in. And there's going to be a lot of trouble that we're going to be witnessing. And I would like friends to consider the idea that we all of us have many gifts and talents. And that some of those will be learned as we enter into situations to be of help. Be of help to ourselves, be of help to other people. And that there's going to be learning and teaching going on as we enter into being of service to someone, to some situation. An old friend of mine, Ann Thomas, she was in Nova Scotia last I heard. She's gone now. But she was handing me the book, George Fox's Book of Miracles, which I hadn't seen until I was a few years into the work. George Fox, one of the founders of Quakers, did a lot of miracles. And Anne was telling me a story from her family. She and her father would go and visit people in the mental asylum who had no visitors on Sunday afternoons. And one day, as a young teenager, she turned to her father and said, well, when we visit George, why do I get a pain in my chest? And her father said, oh, that's a healing gift that our family has. I feel it too. And it means that George needs help with his heart, maybe surgery. 40 years later, she's in Canada. She's gone to the butcher to get a turkey for Thanksgiving. She gets a pain in her chest. She looks at the butcher, and the butcher is sweating. His face is all red, and he looks in terrible shape. And he's huffing and puffing. And she realizes he has big heart trouble. And she's thinking, how am I going to get him to the hospital? So she says, Oh, I feel so sick. You have to drive me to the emergency room right now. I'm going to die. They go to the ER. She says, well, I feel much better now, but don't you have some pains in your chest? Yes. He got a double bypass that day. And she got a free turkey every Thanksgiving. What I want to suggest to you is that healing gifts are not rare. They are not unique. Our culture moves very quickly. Our culture is overscheduled. There's too much noise. There's flashing lights. There are things that interrupt the quiet and a life of the mind where we can feel our essence, our connection to the earth and to the world and to one another. If we can find more quiet and stillness, those gifts become apparent. And they might be surprising. They might be gifts that are difficult to name. They might be even scary to explore. But I want to suggest that if you have enough quiet and you put your television in the attic, that the likelihood of you discovering what your gifts are greatly increased. And that could be very good for you and everyone around you. I've been working on a third book. This first book, The Dance Between Hope and Fear, is about trauma and healing trauma. And this second book, How Far Have You Traveled, is about knowing about your own goodness, having a clear sense of your own goodness. I want to read you this one story from the new book. The book is a memoir about surviving my childhood and then going on to become a healer. Writing about the early hurt has been hell. There's been nothing therapeutic about it. I'm not discovering anything. It's all known to me. But now I am moving on into writing about the things, about the healing experiences. And that is really a blessing. Here's a story from the early part of the book. I remember a day I was upstairs making the beds with my mother. We were in the little room with the double bed. Out of the blue, she said, I found a pistol in your father's dresser drawer. I'm afraid he will come home drunk one night and shoot us all in our sleep, so I've given it to your uncle to take it away. If Daddy asks you anything, tell him I told you I threw it in the river. I nodded my agreement and nothing more was said. Imagine such a statement. No introduction, such as, I have something to tell you, or this is confidential, or don't be afraid, but. Decades later, I'm retelling this memory during therapy and wondering if this is an accurate story, or even if it's true. I call this uncle one evening and explain. No, he says, I don't remember any gun. Maybe it was another uncle. We talk for a bit and hang up. But 10 minutes later, he calls to say my aunt reminded him of the gun. And yes, it did happen. It was a Beretta. He didn't remember it because he had gotten rid of it. It was broken and could have gone off accidentally at any time, he said. I asked what year that was. He said he was just back from Okinawa, so 1960. I was 8 years old. This was the madness, violence, and stupidity I waded through in my parents' house as a young child. My mother took her position as oldest sister very seriously. It was one of the few roles of authority that she would have in her life. But she'd made the mistake of marrying a very wounded man who would never grow up, and now she was too embarrassed to tell others how much danger we were in. So she confided in a young brother-in-law and me. She was terrified of the repercussions she faced for removing and disappearing one of her husband's possessions. The story reveals the essence of the pattern I witnessed and experienced early in life. There is a problem. It is a big, dangerous problem. We cannot talk about it. There is no solution. We must try and act normally so that no one will see. But we cannot make any changes, not for safety or honesty or love of one another. This was transmitted by silences, looks that warned of hiding the truth and secret shame. It was like a religion or philosophy, a reality that was only reality, that was the only reality and not to be questioned. I followed it as best I could, unaware of its depth and pathology. In carrying this secret, I was more aware than my two older brothers of the horrible construction of the family system, involving alcohol, rage, and violence. It would be years before I would try to stop saving my mother from this pathological life, after realizing she was choosing to stay in it. And she did, all of her 80 years. I'm wondering if maybe you have some questions for me.
And if you have a question here in the room, please let me know and I'll bring you this microphone so the folks on Zoom can hear. And if you're on Zoom and you want to ask a question, you can just unmute and share your question with us.
Sure. Yeah.
Remind me your name.
I'm Judy. You said you had received angelic messages about that you would be a while in Vermont, a long time. Can you talk about that? Would you like to, or is that something?
When I'm getting a message, sometimes I'm getting a message about someone else's pain. I'll walk into a room with a workshop. There might be 20 people or 75 people, and there will be 3 or 4 strangers who somehow I recognize, and I know about the pain in their life, and I know it's going to be relieved. And later on, they'll be telling me some horrible story, and I'll be nodding and smiling and saying, And then we do some work and they feel very differently. Not always. Sometimes I'm a little bit of a help, sometimes it's a medium help. Once in a while it's big, which is really nice. And the messages come to me very much the way they come in meeting for worship during the silence. They aren't necessarily words or pictures, but it's a sudden knowing. There is a knowing that I did not have before that now has come and is practical and pragmatic, and I can use it. I was doing some work earlier today, and it has put me in touch with a lot of grief. And it has softened me. I've just driven cross country for 7 or 9 days, and my body's exhausted, you know. But the grief that I'm experiencing of my own life has brought me also a lot of tenderness. So my body has relaxed and released. Sometimes I ask for messages. Sometimes I'm shaking my fist at the sky and saying, what the hell is going on here? And of course, the more polite, prayerful way to do that is to say, I'm happy to learn whatever it is you have to show me, especially about this thing in particular in front of me. I would like to know what to do. I have to be well rested to receive those messages. I have to taper my capacity for sugar or caffeine. To be clear with that, I have to drink lots of water, and I cannot participate in popular culture. You know, I don't know what a Kardashian is. And I think I'm better off for it, you know. So there are things in popular culture which are animated to keep us from these essences. And that silence, that Quaker meeting for silence of an hour, that's the very least it should be. Yes. Other things I can tell you. I've talked you to death. No.
Yeah, I was wondering, whoa. I was wondering, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. How you found your way to Quakers and how your Quaker meeting has supported you in your work?
When I was 16 years old, I'd just gotten my license. I love to drive. I love driving cross country. I love seeing how big the country is. I love just going to the store, you know. I love to drive. Well, my friend Melvin Ash, who wrote The Zen of Recovery and some other wonderful books on Zen and beatniks, he said there's a colonel from World War I at the Quaker meeting that I need to interview for the school newspaper. Will you drive me? And we drove to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and walked into this lovely old building where the meeting used to be. And I sat down, and there was all this quiet, and I thought, oh, I'm not Catholic. I'm not supposed to be Catholic. I'm Quaker. This is where I'm supposed to be. My parents had a fit. Of course, I was the only one going to church, but they still had a fit. And so I began attending Friends immediately at 16. My meeting in Putney, Vermont, when I began attending there in the late 70s, we were a group of 6 to 10 people meeting around a wood stove in a private school. There were some lovely old Quakers there, and it made the worship very deep and good. About 10 years later, I was away and then came back and had begun my work and was telling people about it. And so they began to discuss with me the idea of being a released friend. And at first I thought that meant, sort of running around loose. But release really meant that someone's going to go and do some work, so they can't be a regular member of meeting. He's not going to be there to light the fire. He's not going to be there to set up the chairs. And we think the work that he's doing is a good extension of the meeting. We think it's good work that should be done in the world. And so for the first bit, the support was prayerful. And I got a support group, wonderful, wonderful people. And then later on, they raised money on my behalf. so that I could travel and teach. I had begun living on gifts before the release. And it's a difficult thing living on gifts for me. Partly because my parents always fought about money. So I still have a little bit of fear just around the whole idea of money. I'd rather not talk about it. But I did and am now living primarily on gifts. And all this time. And in a way, it's kind of a Nielsen rating, you know. I go and teach somewhere, and someone says, oh, this is good. This should be supported, and they send a gift, you know. I don't recommend this for anyone. It's scary, you know. I have lived my life not being able to go to the dentist and have snow tires in the same month, you know, like a lot of people. But the meeting was very prayerfully aware of my work and very supportive of it. Yes. Other things I can tell you.
Yeah, there's someone online. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Someone in digital land want to ask a question?
Yes, Don. Can you tell us about how it came clear to you that your career was winding down?
That my what was what? That my work?
Your ministry was finishing up.
Well, there was the heart attack. And with the heart attack, I really had to stop all work. Following the heart attack, when I saw someone in pain, and I would have my compassionate response, I would actually get an ache in my chest. It wasn't my heart, but it was an ache in my chest. It wasn't my physical heart. And I had absolutely no energy to do anything. And so the work came to a halt. I had to stop all of my planned engagements of traveling the country and teaching. And then, of course, I was very angry about it, but I couldn't be too angry about it because I was exhausted from the heart attack. I did not have the heart attack because I was burnt out. I was still doing beautiful work, but there was a vessel in my heart which was completely closed, and apparently you can't do much with it. Now, 2 years later, I'm beginning to feel my gift return. My hands have begun getting hot again. I'm beginning to receive messages. I was having dinner with some friends the other night, and while one person was explaining the trauma to me, I turned to the other person and I said, well, now what's going on in your gut? And it was an illness that I was able to feel and maybe be of some help with later on. So the gift feels like it left while I was resting and recovering, and now I'm beginning to feel some parts of it come back. I don't think I'm ever going to get back on the road teaching, 30 different places a year as I did sometimes. But I'm keeping my ears and eyes open for small ways that I can be of use. So I think maybe it's still good, and there's still going to be some work done along with this third book. Yes. Good to see you, Chuck. Is that what I look like on camera?
Yes.
I look like my mom after the stroke. Other questions?
I could ask another question. Um, I wonder about your Beethoven letters. You used to send us out letters each year, and it was related to um, gleaning support, financial support, but it also was just a way of bringing us up to date. Do you have any comments about Beethoven? Why Beethoven? Um,
Well, when I began the work, I sent I was doing the rape work. We're very involved in the rape crisis. I was just out of massage school, and I was getting involved in the AIDS crisis. And I was out of massage school, and I had no job, and I had no money. And a friend of mine said, well, you're in the same situation that Beethoven was in, because Beethoven was not famous in his own time for most of his life. And there would be patrons who would say, oh yes, go and live in the summer house, but please write us another sonata. And that's largely how he lived towards the end of his life. And so I named my fundraising letter the Beethoven letter. And when the first letter went out, I sent it to 100 people, and 50 people wrote back and said, we'll help you. And so now I put that letter out every spring, and I think we're up to the 39th letter now. Yeah. So yeah, it's a way to keep in touch, and I try and post it where people can see it, and I do a large paper mailing and an emailing, and try and get it up on post boards as much as I can. Yes. Another question?
Yeah, I had a question. I was wondering, when you were a child and you had your childhood trauma, if you feel like that was kind of what brought forth your abilities to help heal and see it in others, and when they were in pain.
Was the trauma and hurt in early life responsible or a causative for my healing gift? No. I had that healing gift early on. I remember as a young child, my cousins and I fell into a patch of nettles on our grandmother's farm. And I took our cousins down to the stream, to the brook, and we made mud packs. And then I put on the sap of the jewel weed. Now, how does a 5-year-old know that? No one told me to do that. So I was in that space. And then what I had to do was climb over that trauma so that I could do this work. And when the AIDS work began, and it was so overwhelming because people were just dying left and right, and it just hurt to be in it. And I remember, looking up at the sky and saying, okay, you have me doing this. You want me to be doing this. But it's really hard. How can I do this? How can I get through doing this? And the answer was clear as a bell. You have to stay tender. You have to stay soft. And in that tenderness, this light will come through you, and you will be able to do work. But if you get frightened, if you get worried, then that's going to get stuck in you as you're doing the work.
That was my next question for you too. I was going to ask you, as a healer, heading into a time where we know that there's going to be some turmoil and some things happening, how do you not, how do you stay in the light and not feel the fear? Do you have a practice that you do?
Well, you can feel the fear. I mean, when I walk into a prison, I'm immediately terrified because of the state police coming to the house to break up the violence in my parents' home, and seeing these men with gun and guns and such. So when I walk into a prison, I have that old fear come into me. But I can't give it much space. There's a discipline, you know. You're going to be afraid? Do it earlier, you know. Your time with fear has to be limited because you have something important to do. You know, I have these angels informing me and passing light through me. You know, that's important. You know, that's an important gift. You have to respect it. And so you develop the disciplines around it so you can do it smoothly. And if you don't keep your disciplines, it doesn't go smoothly. And the people you could have helped, maybe they don't get as much help, you know. You can show up and say, you know, I'm going to do my best today, but I'm not at my best right now. And you can do some good work that way. That's another way of staying tender and soft. Yes.
Thank you.
Another question, maybe one last question before we go.
Hello, John.
Hi, it's so good to see you again.
It's so lovely to see you. And I guess I don't have a question because we know each other through our AIDS work and through AIDS Medicine Miracles. We went to the same massage school. We did a lot of the same things, but I want to acknowledge the Quakers, the friends groups that have supported you all this time, because I know how hard it's been, because I've been on the side of doing all the work without that kind of support. And I've always been a little jealous, to be really honest. So, but you know, I came to Oregon, and AIDS Medicine Miracles had me go to the prisons, and I worked in the prisons, and you know the work that I do with women in trauma, and I just really want you as a group to understand what a gift John really is, and that is my greatest honor. It's been 30 years probably since we've seen each other, though we loosely correspond on Facebook and frantic phone calls once in a while. But you've done such a wonderful, wonderful service in helping him be able to get out and do this work. And not for a minute should you ever feel like it was a waste of anything. And I just continue to hope that you get better so that, you know, there's so much more for us to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And your work over the decades, several decades, has just been so beautiful and so well known, famous in the AIDS world. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, friends. Let's go home. I need to go tuck in now. Yes?
Oh, I wish I could think of a question. I wish I could think of a question, but what I am thinking is how grateful I have been over the years to get to see you at different points in my life. And specifically, I was thinking a moment ago about what a gift it has been to me to learn from you that phrase, I am at my limits. I'm sorry, I can't do any more. I am at my limits.
Yes,
Yeah.
good.
But you have given so much to the Quaker community also over the years. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, friends.
So thank you, John. It's I want to also thank Reedwood for making it possible to bring John here. This was lovely. I want to thank the folks online. I saw several of you who I know are in Eastern time zones, so thank you for being up late. Thank you for registering. All of you who are here in the room, thank you for coming. I do want to point out that on December 4th, Cami, who's here in the front row, will be doing a sound healing workshop here at Reedwood, which could be interesting. And then on January 15th, we'll be working with Chris Bell from the Episcopal Cathedral on Zen koans and looking at those as a spiritual practice for Christians, a different way to explore Scripture. So a couple things coming up. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
And Bert, thank you for setting up our AV and being here on a Wednesday night. Thank you all.
Thanks.
And love to Marshall, who's always in the wings.
Thanks very much.